Big Bang, God saying, let there be light. Are we all just an accident or here by design? Evolution or creation, which one is right? Do I really want the truth or just the theory that's mine? Who, what, where, when, how, and why? I just want an explanation for the stars in the sky. Who, what, when, where, we won't yield. That's what got it Darwin on a level playing field. Paint by numbers, we connect the dots, but it's how we draw the lines between that tear us apart. All want the truth, but we don't know why. Science is such a strange rallying cry. Who, what, where, when, how, and why? I just want an explanation for the stars in the sky. Who, what, when, where, we won't yield. Let's put God and Darwin on a level playing field.
Welcome back to On a Level Playing Field. My name is still Phil Fanstill, and this is part 2 of episode 1. In part 1 of this video, we looked at evolution and creation and argued that they should both be examined in the science classroom. In part 2, we're going to take these two theories for a test drive. We're going to check out their tidal history, kick their data tires, look under their assumptions. We're even going to take them for a race down our street called debate. Did I take that metaphor too far? Just a second. That was my mom. Yes, apparently I did. Now, so what about the history of these two theories?
Now, throughout the Middle Ages in Europe, the majority of Europeans were Christian. Christianity split a few times into Catholic, Orthodox, and later Protestant faiths. Living alongside European Christians were European Jews and Muslims in North Africa, Spain, and the Middle East. What we need to know is that despite all of the differences between these religions, they all agreed on one thing: God did it. That is, a supernatural being called God created everything. The Renaissance in the 14th and 15th centuries ushered in the scientific revolution. The new discoveries in the scientific revolution in turn fed a vast expansion of European power into all four corners of the world through the age of exploration. These three periods mark the turning point from the Middle into the modern age. Fast forward about 300 years to the late 1700s. A geographer by the name of James Hutton proposes the radical concept of geological layers in the Earth's crust. His theories were expounded upon 30 years later by Charles Lyell. Lyell studied these layers and the fossils they contain and concluded that the Earth is not thousands of years old, which is what a literal reading of the dates in the Bible will give you, but millions of years old. Around this same time, a young man was taking a round-the-world cruise on the HMS Beagle after finishing seminary. This man was the naturalist Charles Darwin. This trip around the world inspires him to develop and eventually publish, 25 years later, a book called The Origins of the Species in 1859. The theory of evolution, as first proposed by Charles Darwin, suggests 4 key elements. The first is transmutation, and this is the idea that life changes or evolves over time, and that such change will lead one species to change and adapt into another species. The second is naturalism. Now, naturalism is a belief that all things living and dead were caused and can be understood through natural forces without any need for supernatural interposition. Third, the tree of life. Evolution does not follow a linear pathway, but branches like a tree's limbs, as favorable mutations and environmental pressures lead the changing of species. Fourth, natural selection. The mechanism that Darwin proposed selected the favorable mutations and changes by making them more likely to survive. This is also more commonly known as survival of the fittest. Now, the problem with this theory was that if it was true, evolution undermined much, if not all, of religious teaching. If mankind had evolved from molecule to man, then what role did God play in this, if any? Now, the debate was fierce and has yet to die down. Before this theory came out, most scientists were creationists. God did it. And they assumed that an orderly creator had created an orderly universe that could be known because of this order. Now, with evolution gaining ground and no comprehensive theory of their own to counter it with, creationists went in a number of different directions. Now, a contemporary mentor, Charles Darwin, a man named William Paley, had already introduced the watchmaker analogy. In his book, An Argument for Divine Design in Nature, Paley had written that if you were walking along the seashore and you came across a watch, as you pick up the watch and look at the function, the structure, and the order of that watch, you would naturally assume that it had a designer or a creator. For instance, say you come across Mount Rushmore and you knew nothing about America's or this monument's history. Would you assume that this had happened by chance, or the elements and time? Or would you assume that there was some creator or designer that had functioned and made this? And this is a basic argument. If you see order, structure, and functionality, there must therefore logically be a creator or designer of that. And this argument is still used by creationists to this day. Now, the separation between evolution and creation was not neat. In fact, this divorce spawned 6 major and distinct theories. We'll graph these theories using time and chance as the x-axis and supernatural intervention as the y-axis. The theory of young earth creationism holds to a literal reading of the book of Genesis in the Bible. This theory holds that God created everything in 6 days, a lot of supernatural intervention, about 6,000 to 10,000 years ago. Not a lot of time compared to other theories. This theory goes at the top left of our graph, showing that it would need a lot of divine intervention and not a lot of time. At the opposite end of the spectrum, the theory of naturalistic evolution holds that there was no supernatural involvement and that everything arose from time and chance. This theory would go on the extreme right of our graph, showing it uses an immense amount of time but doesn't use any divine intervention. Theistic evolution is a theory that many came to as they tried to marry their religious beliefs with contemporary scientific thought. This theory holds that God helped to guide evolution, and that while evolution is true, it had significant supernatural help getting started and making sure it stayed on track and achieved the creation that God wanted. This theory finds itself sandwiched between the 2 previous theories. Alien evolution is a theory proposed by Nobel Prize laureate and the co-discoverer of DNA, Francis Crick. He and others believed that there wasn't enough time or proper setting for life to start here on Earth, and therefore that life was planted here either accidentally or purposely by life elsewhere in our universe. This theory takes its place between the other 2 variations of evolution. 2 other creation theories try to balance the age of the Earth with the creation account found in Genesis. The first is the gap theory. The gap theory suggests that there is a gap of time between Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, and Genesis chapter 1, verse 2. This gap of millions or billions of years would account for the fossil record, dinosaurs, and still hold to a fairly literal reading of the rest of Genesis. It does find itself near young earth creationism on the left of our graph. The day-age theory proposes that each of the 6 days of creation are not literal days, as we understand them, of 24 hours, but period or ages in Earth's history that could have lasted millions or billions of years. This theory completes our spectrum graph as it comes to rest between theistic evolution and the gap theory. Now, intelligent design is a recent addition to the debate, but it's similar to William Paley's argument that structure, functionality, and complexity point us to a designer. This argument does not hold its own spot as a theory on our graph, but has been used to support theories from young Earth creationism all the way to theistic evolution. What is important to remember is that there's not just one creation theory, and the reason for this is simple. Before evolution, everyone just assumed God did it. When evolution was proposed and the serious challenge that it presented to religion was understood, only then did creation science begin in earnest, creating its own theories, collecting its own data, its own interpretations. It is at this point that we arrive in the last 50 years in America. In 1957, in the height of the Cold War, President Eisenhower signed the National Defense of Education Act. This act required the teaching of evolution in the public school classroom in an effort to keep up with the scientific advances of the Soviet Union. Now, since the introduction of evolution and creation, there has been immense controversy, conflict, and court cases. Now, many school boards, parents, teachers, and students see evolution as a threat to their religion, and many of these have even rejected the whole field of science. On the other hand, others have embraced evolution and have tried to show how evolution and religion can coexist as separate yet equal ways of viewing life. Meanwhile, creation science had a battle of their own. When evolution gained acceptance in the scientific community and in the halls of academia, Creationists try to get approval for their theory to be taught as an alternative to evolution in the public high school classroom. Now, the Supreme Court struck this down numerous times. Basically, the Supreme Court said no state school board could force a teacher to teach creation science. Now, the law clearly states and actually encourages teachers to teach alternate theories to evolution. It is up to the teacher what theory they would like to teach, which could include creation science. But it is up to the teacher what they want to teach in addition to evolution. In our final segment today, we have two very special guests who are near and dear to my heart. I can almost say they're closer than a brother to me, but don't tell my brothers. Conveniently, one of them is a devout evolutionist, and the other a devout creationist. Now, to help alleviate any confusion, I'm going to call the evolutionist Mr. E and the creationist Mr. C. Mr. E, thanks for joining us today.
Sure, and thanks for inviting me here today.
Tell us, what is the theory of evolution?
Now, Mr. E or mystery? Interesting. Well, there is no mystery with evolution. Evolution is simple. It's a profound theory. Life changes. Life evolves. Species adapt over time through beneficial mutations, environmental factors, and these beneficial mutations are passed on to their descendants, and the stronger ones survive. Survival of the fittest, or natural selection. Sir Charles Darwin theorized that all life changes, that we can see it, we can understand it entirely through the mechanisms in nature. So we don't need to appeal to a supernatural deity to get us out of trouble. All the puzzle pieces are there. We just have to look for them and put them together and put the puzzle of life together. And that's what naturalistic evolution attempts to do, and it is doing quite well at. Thank you, Mr. E. Now joining us to describe the creation theory is Mr. C. Thanks for inviting me here today. Glad I could make it. So is it Mr. C or is it Mr. C? No, got nothing. Earlier I talked about the 6 distinct theories that make up the spectrum from naturalistic evolution to young earth creationism. Now we could have interviewed anyone from these different theories, but we decided for the most contrast we would interview someone from a young earth creation position. So Mr. C, tell us about young earth creationism. The theory of creation states that about thousands of years ago, a supernatural being, God, Jehovah, Yahweh, Vishnu, Allah, depending on the version of creation, created the earth and all that is in it in much the same state as is today. Young earth creationists look at the book of Genesis in the Torah or the Old Testament, and they see that this creation, they believe, took place in a literal 6 days, about 6 to 10,000 years ago. So, Mr. E, how's that for simple? Let's examine how each of these theories handles the different areas of science. First would be time. So, Mr. E, tell me how your theory handles the issue of time. I'll be glad to give you a ton, but I don't want to embarrass Mr. C when he can't keep up. Oh, I'll keep up. Don't worry. Just try me. Bring it on.
Seriously, guys, it's like arguing with myself. And that gets old. Now, Mr. E, start us off by telling us how you date the Earth.
You're dating the Earth?
Mr. C, you know what I mean.
Ignore him. He's always taken everything literally.
Now, Mr. E, you mentioned the geological column. Tell me how your theory interprets this evidence.
So how do I date, or how do I measure the Earth's age? Well, there are a couple ways. The most accurate is radioisotope dating. Okay, and this is where we'll take a rock, and we know how much of a radioisotope there was, whether it's carbon-14 or whether it's uranium, or there's a number that we can use and measure. And how many did it start with? How many does it have now? We measure the difference. We use half-life, and we find the age. Voila. Okay, so that's one thing we do. We also look at the geological column. The further down you go, the older it is. Kind of like dirty clothes in the laundry basket. The further down in the laundry basket, the older and smellier the clothes. Further down you go, the older stuff is, and we are able to find out that the lowest layers are trilobites and upper layers are mankind fossils in between dinosaurs and all that. Time is very important. As you mentioned, that's one of the biggest differences. He believes in 20 billion years, I believe about 6,000. Two things there, two problems with how you're dating the Earth there. First of all, circular logic. You're using circular logic when you talk about the geological column. You date the rock by the layer and the layer by the rock. How old is the layer? Well, what fossils are found there? Okay. How old is the fossil? Well, what layers are found in? Well, pick one. You can't have them both dating each other. And then radioisotope dating.
radioisotope dating, is based on a lot of assumptions. How much radioisotope was there in the beginning? What is the rate of decay? And these are things we don't know. We weren't there to witness the rate of decay. We know what the rate of decay is now, the half-life now, but that could have changed, and probably very well did change over the last 5,000-6,000 years. Now, young Earth creation, we have a lot of evidence that points to a young Earth. The oceans are getting saltier every year. The oldest tree, the Sahara Desert, the oldest tree is 4,300 years old. The oldest desert, the Sahara, is about 4,000 years old. The Great Barrier Reef in Australia, about 4,000 years old. And of course, it would be older, but about 4,400 years ago, there was a massive worldwide flood. Okay, see, this is a big problem I have in debating creationists, is they will throw out anything that doesn't jive with their theory. And that's not science. In science, you take all the facts, you gather all the facts, but they just throw away half the pieces. They pick the pieces they want, they make their little puzzle, but they've thrown out radioisotope. We can prove that. Radioisotope dating, you can prove that mathematically with physics, measurements. Now, Mr. E, you mentioned the geological column. Tell me how your theory interprets this evidence. Now, each layer in the geological column took millions of years to form. Okay? It's kind of like the dust and debris in everyday life. As it accumulates, it gets deeper and deeper. Well, those layers, 5, 10 feet, take a long time, millions of years. If a layer took millions of years to create, wouldn't the animals all decompose before they're fossilized? Now, the fossils that are buried there are only a fraction of those creatures that actually lived. The fossils we have, this fortunate soul, unfortunate at the time, fortunate for us, he was buried quickly. Maybe a volcano, maybe a mudslide, okay? But most of the animals that died decomposed, and we don't have any trace of them. And these millions of years, the only way you're going to have 250,000 fossils is to have a quick burial. And a worldwide flood would do that, exactly that. It would bury the dinosaurs first, the heavier creatures first that couldn't get away from the flood waters, and it would stratify them. We also have, on the top of Mount Everest, they have closed clam shells. Now, a clam, when it dies, opens up, okay? And there's half of a clam. But a clam on the top of Mount Everest, in order to be fossilized closed, it would have to be buried quickly. And then how would it end up on top of Mount Everest, the highest peak in the world? Well, this would be in the post-flood Earth changing and transforming and moving. Noah's Ark. Yeah, I tell my kids that same fairy tale. Then how do you explain that fairy tale ending up in over 270 flood legends around the world? They all have the same meaning. Mystery, now what about a worldwide flood? Sure, there have been floods. Some very devastating regional floods. We've done excavation in the Black Sea, and we found civilizations that are 200 feet underwater. Well, the Bosphorus broke at some time, a long time in the distant past, 3,000, 4,000 years ago. Buried civilizations. We also have the story of Atlantis, may come from that area. So there have been regional floods, and devastating ones, and when there's bad news, it travels fast. And so these flood legends make their way all over the world, but it's just probably regional floods. There is no evidence for a worldwide deluge. That's just delusional. Okay, so the Colorado River made the Grand Canyon by flowing uphill. No, the Colorado River cut through the Grand Canyon. It's called erosion. All right, you see it every day when it rains. It carries away silt, and the rain does. Water does that. Erosion. Third grade science. Look it up. Because look where the Colorado River enters the Grand Canyon, that mountain range, and where it exits. Well, look at this. I mean, no, it can't flow uphill. Of course not. Okay, the plates moved up. Okay, it's called plate tectonics. We'll get into it later. So the flood. After the flood, there were these massive Diluvian lakes. One of them was behind what is now the Grand Canyon, in the area of Colorado and New Mexico. And at some point after the flood, it flooded. It went over the edge of that basin, and as it came through, that it was like a dam breaking. That water from that huge lake went through and formed the Grand Canyon in a matter of weeks and months. And that explains the topography. That explains the water and how erosion can't go uphill, it cuts down. Okay, wow. Now I've heard everything. We know the Colorado River can't cut through rock that fast. Erosion does happen, but it takes a long time. The Colorado took millions of years to cut through the Grand Canyon. Were you listening to me? The Colorado River didn't do it. A lake the size of Colorado, backed up behind that mountain range, burst over and created it. You guys are boring me. Now, what my son really wants to know about dinosaurs. How does your theory handle these terrible lizards? 65 million years ago, an early end-of-life event occurred. The most dominant theory is that a meteorite hit the Earth somewhere in the Yucatan Peninsula and kicked up a cloud of dust, blocking out the sun, killing the vegetation, ergo killing the dinosaurs. The flood. The flood. That's your answer for everything. Come on, come with something original. Change it up a little bit. Blame it on the flood. It's the flood's fault. But the flood really did do it. Well, most of the time. I'm not just making it up because it's a great story. I'm not making it up at all. It's in the Bible. It's been there for 3,000 years. Okay, but it makes a lot of sense. When you look at the evidence and you look at what we have in the historical document, it makes a lot of sense. The flood killed most of the dinosaurs. That's why they became fossilized. Some two, at least two, are on the ark, maybe more. Okay, and they've lived among humans for the last 4,400 years. I thought this was going to be a scientific debate, not science fantasy. Would you let me finish? Okay. Except for if you bumped into a dinosaur 600 years ago, would you call it a dinosaur? No. Dinosaur hadn't been coined until about 200 years ago. 600 years ago, if you'd bumped into a dinosaur, you would have ran away screaming dragon. Then why don't we see them? Show me a dinosaur. Show me a dinosaur, and I'll buy whatever you're selling. Show you a dinosaur? Okay, the Loch Ness Monster. Well, it's been seen, observed over 1,000 times in the last 100 years. Over 1,000 different unique sightings. The Ica stones in South America, in Peru, about 600 years ago, 500-600 years ago, they found these stones. They call them the Ica stones, and there's over 500 of these stones. And this stone is a replica, but it shows a dinosaur or a dragon attacking a man. There's others with dragons eating the man. Well, these guys were not archaeologists. They weren't paleontologists. Why did they draw these dragons and show them attacking people? Maybe because there are dragons attacking people or dinosaurs. Can we move on? I'm getting headache from all this nonsense. I read science books, not children's fantasy literature. Now, Mr. C, what sort of scholarly support or historical evidence does your theory have? First, civilizations. The oldest civilizations, Sumer in modern-day Iraq, Babylon, these date to about 4,000 years ago. The flood legends, as I mentioned, the legends of dragons, okay? These all support a worldwide flood, the evidence of dragons or dinosaurs all over the earth, and the percentage of the world that believes in some version of creation. Cavemen, cave paintings. Written records, as you mentioned, only go back about 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 years. The fossil record, however, takes us back billions of years. Why is it you won't see what's right before your eyes? People for thousands of years have been observing and writing down their observations in these poems, in these books. And you would rather listen to fossils that can't even speak than to listen to the people that were there and saw it and wrote it down for you. Now, that's just silly. Now, science is testing. You keep talking about history as if it's science, but science is testing. Okay? But science is observation. If you ignore all the observations that have been taken down for 4,000 years, you're missing a lot. The most oft-used support is the fact that the majority of scientists agree to the general theory of evolution. Okay? Now, the mechanisms of how evolution works and the details of it are still being worked out, and there's a lively discussion. We're not automatons. Okay? We're scientists. We debate. We argue with each other a lot. Okay? But the general theory of evolution is agreed upon. Okay, 93%? I'm surprised it's not more. I'll tell you why. Because you're stacking the deck. When it comes to evolution and science, the two have become like linked. You can't be in science unless you believe in evolution. And you've ensured this over the years by every government posting, all the tenures, the scholarships and grants. These are all tied to evolution. If you don't buy into evolution, you're not going to get that money. You're not going to get that tenureship. And if you stand up and say you believe in something different, you're going to possibly lose your job. You're going to lose grant money. It's an intimidation. There's a lot of that going on. Mr. C, you're on your soapbox again. Oops. Sorry about that. Mr. E, what about the universe? The universe. How did the universe get here? Well, that's going back. But yeah, the billions of light years. Starlight, the expansion
of the universe. We know where the universe, there was a Big Bang, because the universe is expanding. We can measure this expansion. And so if a baseball comes flying across my face this way, then I know it had to come from that direction. Okay? Don't throw no ideas. Okay? But we can measure this expansion. We know where it originated from. We also, using trigonometry, we can find out the distance to stars, billions of light years. How could the Earth only be 6,000 years old, the universe 6,000 years old, if we're getting light from stars that are billions of light years away? Reel me this back. Okay, that's assuming that the rate of expansion has always been the same. You mentioned the baseball. Well, that's a good analogy. Back in my prime, when I played baseball, 4th grade Little League, as I would get that ball and hurl it in at the speed of light, I thought, I would go very fast as it left my hand. As it traveled through time and space, it slowed down. And then finally it hit the ground and dribbled on into the infield to second base. And you're assuming that the rate now of light and of other things has always been constant, uniformitarianism. We don't know that. It could have been very much faster originally, and now it's kind of slowed down. And if that's the case, who's to say the universe could very well have expanded very quickly, rapidly, and then is now slowing down. So the speed of light that we measure now is actually the slow piddling into the infield. Now we do know a comet, the tail of a comet is made up of ice and dirt and rocks, and is slowly losing that tail. And we know by the rate of that losing that tail that a comet cannot last for more than 10,000 years. Well, we still have comets in our solar system, so how are we doing that? And they have the Oort cloud, that's one theory that's proposed, but it doesn't hold a lot of water because we don't know where it is, I haven't seen it. Or the universe is only 6,000 to 10,000 years old, and those comets are flying around. They have been there since the beginning. Okay, Mr. C, how did the universe begin? God said, let there be light, and boom, the Big Bang. Okay, so now you believe in the Big Bang? Yeah, you'll come around eventually. Sure I do. God said it, and bang, it happened. Now the thing is, evolutionists believe that the universe and the earth had always been up until about 50 years ago. Creationists have been saying for 3,000 years that the universe had a beginning. Genesis 1:1. So you're just now catching on. Yes, the universe had a beginning. The Big Bang. Now life arose in a primordial soup about 3 billion years ago on Earth. Given enough time, anything is possible. So you did read the book of children's fairy tales. Did you enjoy it? What? Okay, the Earth's 5 billion years old, give or take a couple million years. That's a fact, not a fairy tale. Based on your assumptions. On one hand, you say life changes constantly. Evolution change. On the other hand, you say the rate of decay can't change. So you believe in uniformitarianism that things don't change, but the whole premise of evolution is change. Well, which is it? You can't have it both ways. Either things change and everything is subject to change, and then you have to admit that the rate of decay could change, or things never change, and then the whole theory of evolution is thrown out the window. So which is it? Okay, you do the same thing, except for you say life doesn't change and the decay rates do. Well, let me give you a little lesson here in physics and biology. Biology does change. My children, they have dirty diapers. I change them. They're growing up. They're changing every day. Life changes. Math doesn't change. 2 plus 2 has always been 4 ever since I was a child. Okay, I've changed. Math has not. Physics doesn't change. Decay rates don't change. Life does change. Okay, and then you introduce a supernatural being, which we can't test, and he can come into this universe whenever he wants and tinker with things. That's not science. So, Mr. C, how did life begin on Earth? Supernatural being, or God, created life. Now, which God that is, I don't honestly know. That's a religious question. But an intelligent designer, an intelligent being, created life on Earth. And how is that scientific? How can you test that? You can't. Now, we can test what life was like in primordial soup 3 billion years ago. Okay, so scientists created life. I didn't say that. We can't create life yet. But we did, a number of years ago in the Miller-Urey experiment, we did create the conditions of an early Earth, and we're able to, in that early Earth environment, create amino acids. And these amino acids are the building blocks of life. And so eventually life would have happened, and of course indeed did happen, and that has evolved over the years. This life has changed and adapted and reproduced,
And now we can trace all of mankind, the tree of life, all the way back to that first cell, that first life that formed from amino acids. And we can trace this is fascinating, we can trace this evolution using homologous structures that are similar from creature to creature, from animal to animal. Vestigial organs that we don't need anymore, but we still have, like the appendix. Genetics, we can trace the evolution from man back to chimpanzee, back all the way. Now, God created everything in kinds, not species. And there is evolution, microevolution, a small change within a kind, like with dogs. Probably on Noah's Ark, there were 2 dogs. And over time, that species, that kind, has changed, and you have these variations in dogs. But they're all still dogs. There's no cats in that family. I mean, the species, the kind has micro-evolved, has changed, but it's still a dog. Macroevolution is where that dog would change into a cat, or that cat would change into a elephant or something. Okay. Microevolution, small change. I think we all admit that, it's scientifically observable. Okay. Macroevolution, nobody has observed that. Okay. You connect your dots with your fossils, but a lot of times that's creative writing. Mutations do exist, but virtually all mutations are harmful. Very rarely is your mutation helpful, and even then it's only helpful for a little bit, because a mutation is a loss of information. You can't make something better by losing information. And that's one of the biggest fallacies in evolution, is you're starting from very little information in a single-cell organism, and then you're adding information. How are you adding information? Okay, information can be lost, can't be added. I've said this before, but given enough time, anything is possible. So time is your answer to everything. Mine's a flood, yours is time. Now, both of you, tell me how your theory helps to explain life on Earth and predict future discoveries. That is a great question. The framework that evolution provides to biologists allows them to classify, to organize organisms and life on Earth. And it also allows for future discoveries and prepares future discoveries. When this has benefited mankind greatly, as mentioned earlier with genetics and now with antibacterial medicines. Now, first of all, just because it is true, modern biology is structured around the theory of evolution. But that doesn't make the theory of evolution correct. It just merely means that modern biology is structured around it. About 500 years ago, planetary science was structured around the theory of geocentrism, the idea that the Earth was the center of the universe. And all the astronomers, they looked to the heavens and they based their findings on that the Earth was the center. Didn't make the theory true. Now, we're running out of time, so I'm going to give each of you a moment to summarize your argument, make a closing statement. Occam's razor. Occam's razor states simply, the simplest explanation is probably the right one. Okay? Life, nature provides us the answers. Why do we need to create a god or gods, supernatural entities? Why do we need to create these to answer these questions? The answers are out there if we search hard enough. The truth is out there. We just have to look for it. We have to dig for it. Besides, creating a god, a supernatural deity, only puts the question of origins back further. Where did he come from, or she? All right. And we've seen evolution in action. We've seen it with moths, with viruses, with finches. In nature, the dinosaurs, the fossil record, we've seen it in action. We need to embrace naturalistic evolution. We need to embrace it and understand it and go forward with it, use it to help make this world a better place. This is all we have. There is no pie in the sky in the great by and by. We need to embrace this, move forward with it, because this is all we have. Let's not waste any more time. Mr. C, it's your turn. Well, thank you. I've enjoyed this discussion. And in my conclusion, a couple things. You mentioned Occam's razor. Occam's razor, simplest explanation is probably correct. Well, what's more simple than God did it? I think naturalistic evolution, you've gone through a lot of hoops to get God out. And why, for one question, why would evolution create religion? I mean, how would that evolve necessarily? It reminds me more of an unlock code in a video game. The designer put it there. That's why people want a God, because the designer put it there, that unlock code, if you will, in some video game. That makes a lot more sense, that there is a God and he wants us to know him. So we desire religion. Why else 95% of the earth religious in one way or another? All I'm asking is for you to look at the evidence yourself analyze, interpret it, test it. Don't just take their assumptions and take what they tell you. Look at it yourself. I think as you test this, you'll be surprised at what you find. Thank you. Thank you both for coming today. Mr. E, excellent to talk with you again. Have a great day. Well, thank you for having me. It has been a joy. I always enjoy discussing evolution. I want Polk students to understand it's a powerful, profound theory. The more you understand about it, the more it makes sense. So thank you for letting me come out and discuss it with you and debate it, and it's been a pleasure. Thank you. Mr. C, thank you for coming today. I appreciate it, as always. Thanks for having me here today. I've really enjoyed this discussion. Hope you'll have me back. It feels like I'm among family. See you guys. Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. You know what? They both left without getting paid. Morons. Now, in the future, we'll be interviewing real experts. But for now, those two experts did raise some valid points. Worth researching further, considering, contrasting, analyzing. For now, though, I am kind of curious. This is which side does have the weightier evidence. Seeing they didn't even put it on the scales, let me do that real quick. Huh, even. Oh wait, let me get that. Put that on there. Oh wait, it's not moving. Oh, it's locked. Oh, if I unlock it. Ah, that makes a lot more sense when you think about it. Huh, interesting.